Heute reden wir über das Reflexiv. Was ist das Reflexiv? Wenn das Subjekt und das Objekt in einem Satz dieselbe Person sind oder dasselbe Objekt sind, dann benutzen wir das Reflexiv. Im Deutschen benutzen wir normalerweise das Wort sich. Was bedeutet sich? Zum Beispiel, Heinrich steht allein im Badezimmer. Es gibt einen Spiegel an der Wand. Er sieht einen Mann im Spiegel. Er sieht Heinrich im Spiegel. Wir können hier ein Pronomen benutzen, aber welches Pronomen sollen wir benutzen? Könnten wir sagen, Heinrich sieht ihn im Spiegel? Dieser Satz ist mehrdeutig und auch verwirrend. Wer ist ihn? Ihn ist Heinrich. Wir können hier das Wort sich verwenden. Heinrich sieht sich im Spiegel. Okay, dieser Satz ist eindeutig. Es gibt keine Ambiguität mehr. Großartig. Also, Sie sehen sich im Spiegel. Kristen sieht sich im Spiegel. Der Hund sieht sich im Spiegel. Großartig. Es scheint, als ob wir das Wort sich immer verwenden können, oder? Nicht wirklich. Es gibt ein paar Ausnahmen, dass wir auswendig lernen müssen. Zum Beispiel, ich sehe mich im Spiegel. Wir sagen nicht, ich sehe sich im Spiegel. Das sollten wir sagen. Das würde Sinn ergeben, aber das tun wir nicht. Ich sehe mich im Spiegel. Du siehst dich im Spiegel. Ihr seht euch im Spiegel. Wir sehen uns im Spiegel. Okay, das sind die Ausnahmen, dass wir auswendig lernen müssen. Im Deutschen müssen wir auch auf den Dativ achten. Zum Beispiel, ich gebe es mir. Wir sagen nicht, ich gebe es mich. Wir sagen nicht, ich gebe es sich, sondern ich gebe es mir, wegen geben. Okay, ein weiteres Beispiel. Du redest zu viel von dir. Wir sagen nicht von sich, sondern von dir, wegen von. Von erfordert den Dativ. Okay, das ist nicht so kompliziert, oder? Great, but let's switch to English. In English, just as in German, when the subject and the object of a sentence are the same person, place, or thing, we use reflexive pronouns. In English, the reflexive pronouns are easy to spot because they all end with some variation of the word self. Myself, yourself, itself, themselves, plural, ourselves, plural. Okay, so Heinrich sees himself in the mirror. Could we in English say, Heinrich sees him in the mirror? This sentence is ambiguous in English in the same way and for the same reason as it is ambiguous in German. Who's him? Who does him refer to? Is it Heinrich or is there another guy in the bathroom? Heinrich sees himself in the mirror is not ambiguous at all. It's clear now that Heinrich is looking at himself. Okay, great. But in English, a lot of native speakers get this wrong. We make this is a very common mistake in English. For example, if I'm standing in a bathroom alone and I see someone in the mirror, how do I express that in English? Could I say, I see I in the mirror? Nope. I is a subject pronoun. It's very clearly wrong there. But could I say, I see me in the mirror? Me is a direct object pronoun, so it seems like that should work, right? It's technically wrong. It's technically a reflexive pronoun is required there, so I should say I see myself in the mirror. But a lot of native speakers would say this incorrectly. I see me in the mirror. Another example. First, I give one to me, and then I give one to you. Is that sentence correct, or is it wrong? Technically, it's wrong. It should be, first I give one to myself, reflexive. But a lot of native speakers would get it wrong, and because me is a direct object pronoun, it still makes sense. You know, you can still parse that. So, we see that both languages are a little bit wonky with the reflexive. German, in both English and German, we have to memorize different forms of the reflexive pronouns depending on who we're talking about. In German, they've got the extra complexity of the dative case, which we don't have in English, and in English, we've got the extra complexity of people misusing this and saying it incorrectly, which is a bit confusing, probably, to students of the language, but okay. So it seems like the two languages are roughly equal in terms of wonkiness here with the reflexive, right? Well, no, not really. There's a couple of problems in German with the reflexive that don't exist in English. Let's take a look at them. In German, we have the concept of reflexive verbs. These are verbs that require to be used reflexively. A good way to spot these, if you look up a verb in a German dictionary, if it has the word sich in front of it, that's a strong clue that you have to use that verb reflexively. For example, sich befinden. Befinden means to be located in. Okay, so it sounds like we should be able to say, wir befinden in Calgary. We are located in Calgary. But that's wrong. Because it's not befinden, it's sich befinden. You have to use it reflexively. Wir befinden uns in Calgary. If you try to translate that literally to English, it sounds like you're trying to say, we are located ourselves in Calgary, which doesn't mean much. I guess you could say, we find ourselves in Calgary on this beautiful September day, but that sounds a little poetic and needlessly formal. In English, a better translation is just to drop the reflexive because you don't need it. We are located in Calgary. Great. In German, wir befinden uns in Calgary. Then there are a lot of verbs in German that can be used reflexively, but it's not a requirement. For example, how about bereit machen, to make something ready or to get something ready? You can use that with a direct accusative object. Ich mache es bereit, I'm making it ready or I'm getting it ready. But you can also say sich bereit machen. Ich mache mich bereit, I'm making myself ready or I'm getting myself ready. This in English sounds, I mean, that works. You could say that, I'm getting myself ready, but it sounds a little redundant. In English, you could just drop the reflexive part entirely. You could just say, I'm getting ready. It means the same thing, but it's easier to say. Another example of this is the verb verstehen, which usually means to understand. Ich verstehe diesen Typ sehr gut. I understand this guy very well. But the verb verstehen, a tunnel, pardon me, a moment.
Unsere liebe Frau vom kalten Brunnen, bescher uns armen Landsknecht eine warme Sonnen. Lass uns nicht erfrieren, wohl in des Wirtes Haus, ziehen wir mit vollem Säckel und leerem wieder hinaus. Die Trommeln, die Trommeln, die Trommeln, die Trommeln, Landsknecht voran.
But the verb verstehen can also be used reflexively in some expressions. For example, sich mit jemandem verstehen. What does that mean? That means to get along with someone. Ich verstehe mich mit diesem Typ sehr gut. I get along very well with this guy. It's a bit of a jump to go from I understand this guy very well to I get along with this guy very well. The addition of sich there changes the meaning of that verb, and the Germans love doing this. There's a bunch of verbs that do that in the entire German language. Okay, let's move on to something called reciprocal action. In English, we have the concept of each other, and this does exist in German. They do use it sometimes. For example, the cat and the dog are playing with each other. Die Katze und der Hund spielen miteinander. What does miteinander mean? Miteinander, mit of course means with, and einander looks like a great translation of each other or one another. Great, fantastic, that's a perfectly intuitive translation. I love it. That's awesome. But what's the catch? The catch is that the Germans often, for some reason, they won't use that to express this construct of one another. They will use the reflexive instead. I don't know why. For example, the cat and the dog looked at each other. How would you say that in German? You would expect to see a sentence that contains some form of einander, and I do believe that is an option. But in German, another way to say that is die Katze und der Hund haben sich angesehen. What? They have seen themselves? It looks like if you try to translate sich into English as a reflexive pronoun, it looks like you're saying the dog and the cat see themselves or looked at themselves. But that's not what we meant. Is it? When I hear the dog and the cat looked at themselves, I picture a dog and a cat standing side by side, and they're looking at their own reflections in a mirror. Both the cat and the dog are seeing a reflection of both the cat and the dog. They're looking at themselves, plural. But that's not what we meant. What we meant to say is the dog and the cat are facing each other. The dog can only see the cat, and the cat can only see the dog. They are looking at each other. This idea of each other in German is often expressed with the reflexive pronoun sich. But that would make no sense in English. Another example, let's say we've got a bunch of kids and they're all grown up and they've moved away to different cities, but our kids call each other every day to stay in touch with one another. Okay, how would you say that in German? Unsere Kinder rufen sich jeden Tag an. Literally, it looks like you're saying our kids call themselves every day. To me, that sounds like each kid picks up their own phone, dials their own number, and talks to themselves. But again, that's not what we meant. We meant each other. Unsere Kinder rufen sich jeden Tag an. Sounds very strange if you're coming from English, but that's how they say that in German. A very, very common example of this in German is to say, wir sehen uns morgen. What does that mean? Again, if you try to translate sich literally there, it looks like you're saying, we'll see ourselves tomorrow. But this is the German way of saying, see you tomorrow. Literally, it's more like, we'll see each other tomorrow. But again, that construct of each other in German is expressed with sich, which is hard to wrap your head around. So, once again, we see that something that is kind of, I mean, maybe mildly complicated in English is a fair bit more complicated in German. But I mean, I don't know, that's no surprise. We've seen that so many times on this channel. So we have to be careful when we're translating the reflexive into and out of German, because the Germans will use it in sometimes strange and maybe mildly unexpected ways. So that's it for today. We will see ourselves next time on Lernen und Fahren.